Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Ryan Nobles in Washington, and we begin with breaking news out of Wisconsin, where authorities have just updated the public after at least 2 people were killed and 6 others, all students, were injured in a school shooting at a Christian school in Madison. Authorities say 2 of the injured students are in critical condition with life-threatening injuries. 4 other students have been hospitalized with what are believed to be non-life-threatening injuries. Here's Madison's police chief just moments ago.
At 10:57 a.m., our team was called to the Abundant Life Christian School in reference to an active shooter. We know that 3 people are dead, including the suspect shooter. We know that the suspect shooter was a teenage student who attended the school. At this time, we're not releasing the age or gender of the student or any other identifying remarks about the student. 2 other people have died. That died were a teacher and a teenage student. I think we can all agree that enough is enough, and we have to come together to do everything we can to support our students, to prevent press conferences like these from happening again and again and again. The school building itself is clear. We have cleared the school. There's no other threats or danger to the community.
And as you heard there, officers responded to the scene at the Abundant Life Christian School just before 11 this morning. At this point, authorities have not released any information about a potential motive, and they stress the investigation is very much ongoing. Here's a bit of what we heard from the police chief just a few hours ago.
The truth is, today is a sad, sad day, not only for Madison, but for our entire country, where yet another police chief press conference to speak about violence in our community, specifically in one of the places that's most sacred to me as someone who loves education and to someone who has children that are in schools.
The White House says that President Biden has been briefed on the shooting, and senior administration officials are in touch with local authorities about providing federal support. Joining me now is NBC News correspondent Shaq Brewster, who is on the ground in Madison, Wisconsin. So, Shaq, update us. What do we know about the victims at this point?
Well, Ryan, that press conference is still ongoing right now, but we did learn more information, not just only about the shooter or suspected shooter in this, but of the victims. We know that there are 6 people in the hospital right now, as the police describes it. 2 of them are in critical condition with life-threatening injuries, again, in the words of the police chief, with 4 others who are still hospitalized. We also learned about the 3 who were killed in this shooting, or who were killed in this shooting. We know 2 of them. One was a teacher and the other was a student. And then the 3rd person that they're listing in that total of 3 is the suspected shooter in this case. One thing that was very clear, and as this press conference is going on, we're still getting some notes from it, is that they're still doing they're still at the very beginning stages of this investigation. They say that there's search warrants that they want to execute. They say that a handgun was used in this shooting. That's something that will be, of course, a focus in this investigation. But they did say that the suspected shooter's family has been cooperating with police. So there's a lot more that we'll learn as the day goes on, but we know that there are still 6 people hospitalized. You have the school saying that they're calling for any prayers that they can get at this point, Ryan.
And Jack, you mentioned that they are in contact with the suspect's parents, but they aren't releasing much information about the suspect themselves, correct?
That's right. We don't know the gender of the suspect. We don't know the age of the suspect. The suspect is only being described as a teenager who was a student at that school. And then the police chief is also saying that they have no idea on motive right now, but he signaled that will definitely be a key focus of this investigation. He was just asked in that press conference that's still ongoing whether or not this person has been had any history with law enforcement, has any criminal history or criminal background, and the chief wasn't able to answer that. But I think that's one of those questions that will be the focus of the investigation as we look ahead to the hours and days to come.
And tell us a little bit about the school. What do we know about the place where this shooting happened?
Yeah, this was a small Christian school. It serves kindergarten all the way up to 12th grade. On the website, it says it serves around 250 families. We don't know exactly how many students attend that school or how big the staff is. The chief also said that there was no city-provided resource officer at that school. He didn't know about any private security. He said he has never been on that campus, suggested that he was intentionally staying away from the crime scene, as he called it, so investigators can work through and process it. But you talk about the 200 people for 12 grades. I mean, you can tell the tight-knit school that this is. According to our NBC News tally, by the way, this is the 4th active school shooting this year across the country. This, of course, is drawing connections to 2023 shooting at a Christian school in Nashville. Of course, this will all be investigated and all looked into as we continue to hear from police and local leaders now.
All right, Jack, great job hustling to get to the scene to get us all that information. If any other news breaks, let us know and we'll put you back on. We appreciate that report. Shaquille Brewster, Absolutely. Live on the ground in Madison, Wisconsin. We'll continue to follow the breaking news. We'll bring you any updates as we get them. But right now, we're going to turn to politics as President-elect Trump stands by his most polarizing cabinet picks during a freewheeling and lengthy press conference from Mar-a-Lago, where he fielded dozens of questions from reporters on everything from vaccine mandates to drone sightings to foreign policy and his legal fights with the media. After announcing a $100 billion investment with the Japanese tech conglomerate SoftBank, the president-elect made it clear during the Q&A that he feels emboldened as he gears up for a second term.
One of the big differences between the first term, everybody was fighting me. In this term, everybody wants to be my friend. I don't know. My personality changed or something. The biggest difference is that people want to get along with me this time.
And while addressing reporters, the president-elect frequently delved into past grievances, even as he previewed plans for his future agenda. On that agenda, he reiterated his ambitious pledges to reduce taxes, cut regulations, slash government spending, while also protecting entitlements and reducing the national debt. Mr. Trump also dangled expedited permits for businesses that invest in the U.S. He threatened more defamation lawsuits against media companies, and he said that there's, quote, got to be a deal in the Ukraine war. He also defended his picks for top positions in his administration with an apparent warning to Republican senators if they oppose his nominees.
If they're unreasonable, if they're opposing somebody for political reasons or stupid reasons, I would say has nothing to do with me. I would say they probably would be primaried. I think Pete Hegseth is making tremendous strides over the last week. He's going to be great. And he didn't even hesitate. When I said, do you want to do this? He said, absolutely.
The president-elect also veering toward conspiracy theories, appearing to lend credence to disproven claims that vaccines might cause autism, as he defended his choice of vaccine skeptic Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to lead the Department of Health and Human Services.
Can I follow up on Robert Kennedy? He's on the Hill today. He's meeting with senators. What do you say to people who are worried that his views on vaccines will translate into policies that will make their kids less safe?
No, I think he's going to be much less radical than you would think. I think he's got a very open mind, or I wouldn't have put him there. He's going to be very much less radical.
Let's bring in some of my NBC News colleagues. Garrett Haake is covering the Trump transition in South Florida. He was in the room for that press conference this morning, and Sahil Kapoor is on Capitol Hill. So, Garrett, we heard a lot of things from the president-elect today. It was certainly reminiscent of some of the events from his first term. But give us a quick fact check on what we heard today.
Where do you want me to start, Ryan? I mean, look, this was, I think, a version of Trump that we see sometimes a little bit all over the map on some of his claims here. On the politics, I do think he has a pretty good read on it in terms of what's going to happen to the people on the Republican side who don't support his nominees, don't support the people that he's going to put forward. I think where he kind of wandered most widely off into the fact-checking territory is things like on his comments about TikTok, where he sort of floated the idea that he might stick up for the company and made its impending ban. He talked about winning young people by 34% of the vote or something like that. There's nowhere that I can find that those numbers add up. And on the Kennedy stuff, it was interesting because I think you framed it correctly. He sort of flirted with the idea of some of these conspiracy theories around vaccines without actually coming right out and embracing them, saying that he does wonder why autism rates have risen in this country in recent years, and they have. but wouldn't go so far as Kennedy has gone to link that to childhood vaccines, just saying that this is something that he wants to get to the bottom of. It's clear that he wants to defend Kennedy, that he doesn't want to throw him over the edge for Kennedy pushing these widely debunked claims about vaccines and autism. But he wants to kind of protect him a little bit while not endorsing the most far-out claims that perhaps his single most polarizing pick for a cabinet selection has made.
All right, I should have been a little more specific about things to fact check, but you picked out a couple of good ones there, Garrett. But let me get a little more specific. He did attack President Biden for what he claims is undermining his border plans. What's the difference between fact and fiction there?
Yeah, so what's going on here, Trump made a point in his prepared remarks to talk about the idea that pieces of the border wall are being sold off, he says, for pennies on the dollar instead of being used and in some cases being offered back to the federal government at a higher price later. He is in the neighborhood here. What he's talking about is something that was slipped into the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act for last year, which essentially authorizes the government to get rid of wall pieces that have been stacked up for years and years not being used, including by selling them to the states if states are willing to use them to refurbish wall instead of put up new wall. The idea of pieces being sold back to the government right now is not something I can either confirm or deny, but it speaks to Trump's willingness to get into shading the truth, shading what he wants to talk about here, to make a case for his pet issue when, frankly, there's not much other news on it. He wants to get restarted on building the border wall quickly. He's going to need money to do it, and it's not clear that Congress is going to have any to throw him anytime in the early part of his administration, although the current plan on Capitol Hill, as you well know, is to kind of break off immigration first and try to do that through a Republican-only bill. I think that's going to be a lot more complicated than Capitol Hill Republicans believe right now.
Yeah, and let's bring Sahil in on that point. He's up on Capitol Hill. Sahil, what is the reality of the money that he is looking for when it comes to this border plan? I mean, how quickly could Congress appropriate that? It's not something that's going to happen on January 20th, that's for sure.
Well, Ryan, I think the first question here is which approach Republicans take. There's still a fight happening within the party as to whether to do this all in one big bill, as Jason Smith, the chair of the Ways and Means Committee, is pleading with Republicans to do, or go the John Thune route, the route that many Senate Republicans want to take, which is to break off one bill, do border security, energy, and then do tax later. There is yet another idea that was proposed just a few days ago by the Freedom Caucus, which is to do one bill with only border provisions and then do everything else later, including energy and taxes. So that's the big question that they have to decide at the beginning. But in terms of border funding, there is plenty of support all over the Republican Party for that. I think even in the tiny House majority, they're going to get enough support for putting money into that bill for President-elect Trump to crack down on immigration enforcement and beef up border security. I don't think that's going to be a controversial issue within the party, which is why some people want to do it very quickly, claim a win, go on and do the other things later.
So, Garrett, let's go back to another one of the hot topics that the president-elect addressed, and that was the situation in Ukraine, which he has promised to end that war as soon as the day he takes office. Listen to what he said today.
Be prepared to make a deal. That's all. Got to be a deal. No, got to be a deal. Too many people being killed. That is a war that's too many people. Got to make a deal. And Putin has to make a deal, too.
Do you believe that Ukraine should cede territory to Russia?
Well, I'm going to let you know that after I have my first meeting. But a lot of that territory, when you look at what's happened to those, I mean, there are cities that there's not a building standing. It's a demolition site. There's not a building standing. So people can't go back to those cities. There's nothing there. It's just rubble.
So, Garrett, I mean, it sounds in many ways that he wants Zelensky just to give Putin what he wants.
I think that's partially right, Ryan. I mean, you could hear Trump, the real estate guy, kind of trying to devalue the property that Ukraine might have to give up to Russia to get some kind of a peace deal. But he's also making an important point that I think shouldn't be lost, which is that Putin has to be willing to get to a deal as well. And as best we can tell from all of our reporting, our national security team here at NBC News, a lot of the reporting that exists in other outlets, is that there's no indication that Vladimir Putin is ready to come to the table and talk with Zelensky either. I mean, Zelensky had his meeting with Trump in France a little more than a week ago now, when Trump was there for the reopening of the Notre Dame Cathedral. I find it hard to believe that Donald Trump would have said anything to us in that room today that he hasn't already said to Zelensky in private. And so I think what we're looking at right now is a little bit of posturing, a little bit of preparing, setting the table, if you will, for what could be a deal that's not going to be great for Ukraine, but is probably going to be better than a stalemate that exists right now, and I think is absolutely contingent on Vladimir Putin being willing to sit down and talk this over with someone. I thought it was interesting that, asked a couple of different ways in that news conference, Trump wouldn't say one way or another whether he has talked to Putin at all, not quite denying it, but not confirming that there's been any kind of even back-channel communication with the Russian president, which will be critical to any deal.
Yeah, I found that interesting, too, where he danced or tried to touch on certain topics. Anytime Putin or a conversation with Putin came up, he just did not even want to entertain it. Sahil, back to you. The president-elect today was talking up RFK Jr., says that he's not going to be radical in response to Garrett's question. RFK on the Hill today for the first time since being picked to lead the HHS. Have we gotten anything out of the meetings that he's had? I know he hasn't been up there that long.
Yeah, not much so far, Ryan. We know that in the last hour, Kennedy arrived for the first time on Capitol Hill to begin a series of meetings. The first meeting was with Senator Rick Scott. Heading into that meeting, Kennedy didn't really engage with shouted questions from reporters about his stances on vaccines and abortion, two issues that are looming over his confirmation process. He's also expected to meet later today, we believe, with Senator Ron Johnson, Markwayne Mullin, Tim Scott, and later this week with heavy hitters like John Thune and John Barrasso, the incoming number 1 and 2 Republicans, as well as Mike Crapo, the chair of the Finance Committee, that's going to report out his nomination and kind of determine whether he has the votes to get to the floor. So a long way to go here. It's just the start of a process. I think Trump's comments will signal to Republicans that he is standing by RFK, that he doesn't consider his past comments, his past views on vaccines to be problematic. And it was very interesting that Trump isn't explicitly endorsing the primary challenges to these Republicans, but he's not disavowing them either. I think many will construe that as they're going to happen.
Yeah. All right. Garrett, Sahil, thank you both. We appreciate it. And coming up, media bias, election integrity, and transition politics. We have more takeaways from President-elect Trump's wide-ranging press conference with just 5 weeks to go until the inauguration. Plus, Bashar al-Assad appears to speak out for the first time since his regime was toppled and fled to Russia. We'll have the very latest from Syria. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. As we mentioned, President-elect Trump answered questions at length for the first time since winning the election. He also renewed his attacks on 2 pillars of democracy: fair elections and a free press. Take a listen.
We have to straighten out the press. Our press is very corrupt, almost as corrupt as our elections. That election, if it were an honorable election, we wouldn't have had any of the problems that we're talking about right now.
Joining me now on set is Shelby Talcott, a politics reporter for Semaphore, Democratic pollster Cornell Belcher. He's also an NBC News political analyst. And Brendan Buck, former advisor to House Speakers Paul Ryan and John Boehner. He is also an NBC News political analyst. So, Shelby, you just heard the president-elect. Does he sound like somebody who just won the last election? I mean, what was your take from him today?
Yeah, I mean, I think overall in the 62-minute remarks, this was just one small part of it. But it is clear, and it has been clear throughout this entire election, that he is still somewhat focused on the last election. And actually, while he was running, there were a lot of Republicans privately and publicly urging him to move on because they said voters are just tired of hearing about 2020. Now, of course, he has won this election, so he can theoretically talk about it as much as he wants because he does not need those voters anymore.
He wasn't penalized for the amount of time that he talked about it. But did you get the, I mean, I've made this joke a couple of times. It's like we fell asleep and woke back up in 2017. Did this remind you of what we dealt with 4 years ago? And is it, or 8 years ago? And is it going to be more of the same? Or is this going to be a rerun of what we saw before?
You know, I think we can expect Donald Trump to continue bringing it up. But I will say the vast majority of that press conference was focused, partially because the questions were focused on what he's going to do once he takes office. So I do anticipate that while we will continue to hear about 2020, as long as the press is asking questions about the future, that's probably where his focus is going to largely be.
So, Brendan, I was thinking about you when he kind of talked about this. Well, I'm not asking to primary anybody that votes against my nominees. But if they get primaried because they vote against my nominees, well, I'm not going to stand in the way of that. I mean, do you think a Republican senator hears that message? Could it influence how they handle the confirmation process?
Honestly, I was struck by the sort of off-ramp he offered people, too, though. He followed that by saying, but, you know, if they have reasonable concerns, like, I get that, too, which is not very Trump-like. I thought he would have stopped right at, I'll primary you. Now, I don't think any Republican senator needs reminding that there are Trump voters out there who could potentially primary. But that's obviously what we have seen with Joni Ernst and her issue with Pete Hegseth. She has very real and legitimate concerns about statements that he's made and accusations that have been made against him. But then she found herself in the middle of this story, and I don't think she wanted to be in the middle of the Pete Hegseth story when she's up for re-election and has to win a primary. Very subtle, maybe not so subtle threats that someone was going to primary. That gets people thinking. And if you're Joni Ernst, that's very easy to understand. I don't think Donald Trump needed to say that, but it's interesting that, at least to me, that he wasn't as strident as I would have expected him to be.
Now, at the same time, we see him this weekend. The speaker's there. The new Senate Majority Leader, John Thune, is there. They all seem to be singing from the same hymnal right now. I mean, how long can this last?
They are and they aren't. I mean, as Sahil talked about earlier, they haven't quite figured out how they're going to order their agenda yet. But I can tell you, from my experience 8 years ago, right after you win, those are great times. Everybody's happy. Everyone wants to get along. Winning makes everybody feel good. They're going to very quickly run into some difficult issues. Their agenda, how you get money for immigration, these nominees. I'm glad John Thune is establishing a relationship with the president. I don't know that he had one much of before, because at some point there may be one of his nominees is going to go down. He's going to have to phone him up and tell him that's the situation. So that relationship is actually really important for their ability to govern.
It did seem over the course of the press conference that all of us sitting at this table could be subject to a lawsuit from Donald Trump at some time or another. Yes, even you, Cornell, because he was talking about suing pollsters, not you specifically, but pollsters in general. He raised the possibility of suing the Des Moines Register over that poll that had him losing. He called it election interference. Is that an actionable legal offense?
Well, look, I'm not even going to play a lawyer on television. By the way, I will say that
play a pollster on television.
Well, a pollster apparently is a step above you two, which he really hates. But look, I think it is problematic coming from the president of the United States, who is in fact the chief law enforcement officers of this country. This sort of nonsense. But I think he does run into political problems, like you said. This is supposed to be the honeymoon time. This is when you're supposed to bring people in and make nice. And I think he is going to run into some political tough spots. Just for the things that he said today. What did he say? I'm going to protect entitlements. I'm going to cut taxes, and I'm going to protect all these programs. We all know that's not possible, right? And I'm going to tackle the debt.
The debt, yeah.
Somehow the math of that doesn't all add up. So he is going to run into political problems real soon with what he's laying out here, especially if he's not bringing more people into the process. And by the way, threatening to primary other people in your party. I've been around politics a long time. I've never seen that from a Democrat or Republican president, just flat out threatening, if you don't go my way, I'm going to make sure you'll get primaried.
You know, Brendan, it's interesting to Cornell's point about these promises that he's made, right? That he can do all these things that we know just physically is impossible given the reality of the federal budget. But we've already started to see him walk back some of these campaign promises, right? He said, well, when I get back in, grocery prices are going to be back to like what they were in 1950. And now he's saying, well, I don't know if I can bring grocery prices down. Will voters, and not necessarily as hardcore supporters, because we know nothing sways them, but that there was a sizable part of the American electorate that doesn't fall in that diehard supporter range that voted for him this last time around. Could they penalize him if they don't see these results that he keeps promising?
Well, I guess there's a lot of people who didn't vote for him who don't care for the promises that he made in the first place. So I don't think they're going to penalize him. I mean, the people who love him are never going to blame him, and that's one of his superpowers, that he is faultless. There's always someone else to blame, someone who didn't fight hard enough for him, someone who led him astray. So he's never going to take the blame from his supporters. He's ultimately going to be judged, I think, on one thing. How's the economy do? And if he blows the economy through tariffs and some type of immigration policy that destroys the economy, they're going to hold him accountable for that, and he'll probably lose the House. All these other things that he says he has a mandate for, I don't know that he actually has a mandate. I don't know that people are expecting him to follow through on a lot of these things, because those people who don't want that didn't vote for him in the first place.
Can I make one quick point? Right? It's not about him at this point. It's about those senators and members of Congress. It's about the midterm election. And I think I've seen this play before. You say, is this for 8 years ago from now? Yeah, I've seen this play before, and it becomes 2018 if he goes along this path, and we know what happened in 2018.
Or 2022, or 2010, every midterm.
So, Shelby, we'll let you have the last word then. I mean, then how important is this confirmation process to get him off on the right foot, and for the Senate to demonstrate to him where they're willing to stand up to him and where they're willing to work with him?
Well, I think it's important for Trump in the sense that it'll give people a really good idea of how much the lawmakers are going to just go along with a lot of what he wants, right? He can only lose 3 votes, and they know that. And so a big reason that I've been told that they're backing Pete Hegseth so aggressively is because they already lost Matt Gaetz, and they're worried. There are concerns inside Trump's orbit that losing Pete Hegseth as well will sort of open the floodgates and allow some of these more moderate Republicans to start pushing back on other things that Donald Trump wants to happen. So I think it's important for Donald Trump from that sense.
And in terms of, where he spends his political capital, is there a particular nominee that's more important or less important, or is it about getting as many through as possible?
I think right now it's about getting as many through as possible. Again, this is a situation where the more people, if you have another Matt Gaetz, if you have 2 more Matt Gaetzes, 3 more Matt Gaetzes, in Donald Trump's eyes, that is the floodgates opening, and it will allow for Republicans to continue to push back on some of the things he wants to do. So he wants all of them to get through.
And I said I was going to give Shelby the last word, but Brendan, will he let one of these nominees go all the way to the floor and lose? Is that something he'd be willing to stomach?
That's a tough call. I mean, usually that's going to be the call of the Republican leader. And you never want to bring something up that's going to fail. And I think that's why a lot of these senators are trying to hey, now would be a good time to move somebody out, because you don't want to do that. But this is a different, if he tells John Thune, I don't care, put him on the floor. I want names on the board who I can go after if they fail. I think that he could probably win standoffs like that, because that's a much tougher, it's much easier to quietly push somebody outside than to go to the floor and do the thumbs down.
And that becomes an ad, right? If you're running against Joni Ernst in a primary. All right, thanks everybody. Shelby, Cornell, Brendan, thank you all so much for being here. We appreciate it. Up next, President-elect Trump accuses the Biden administration of hiding the truth about recent drone sightings as U.S. officials downplay security concerns and try to reassure an anxious public. We'll have the latest on that story, and I'll talk to a New Jersey mayor about his search for answers. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. President-elect Trump is now weighing in on the drone sightings over the tri-state area, accusing the federal government of withholding information from the public.
The government knows what is happening. Look, our military knows where they took off from. They know where it came from and where it went. And for some reason, they don't want to comment. And I think they'd be better off saying what it is. Our military knows and our president knows. And for some reason, they want to keep people in suspense. I can't imagine it's the enemy, because if it was the enemy, they'd blast it out. Something strange is going on. For some reason, they don't want to tell the people, and they should.
Now, the Pentagon has said that the military drones, the military does not own, I should say, the drones, and that they're not coming from an Iranian ship, as some have speculated. Other federal agencies insist the drones do not pose a national security threat, even if they don't know the origin of some of these sightings. An FBI official told reporters this weekend that members of the public are frequently mistaking commercial airliners for drone sightings. Still, New York Governor Kathy Hochul says the government is sending drone detection systems to her state. And New Jersey Congressman Josh Gottheimer is urging the federal government to be more forthcoming with what it knows.
People in New Jersey, around the country, deserve clear answers. They deserve transparency from their government. Is it possible that some of these sightings are airplanes or helicopters or enthusiasts putting up their drones to mess with other people? Sure. But what I find insulting is claiming to people that they're not seeing things that they're seeing with their own eyes. That just doesn't make any sense.
NBC's Maya Eglin joins me now from Teaneck, New Jersey. So, Maya, what do we know about this drone detection technology that may be deployed to both New York and New Jersey?
Yeah, Ryan, we know that Governor Kathy Hochul posted on X that the federal government is sending some of those drone detection systems to the state of New York. They are really going to expand and elevate the current capabilities that the state has in terms of locating and identifying and getting more information about these drones. She is one of many local officials that continue to put pressure on both the Biden administration and Congress for increased resources and access to conduct these investigations. Ryan?
And my Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas offered this explanation yesterday. Take a listen.
There are thousands of drones flown every day in the United States. Recreational drones, commercial drones. That is the reality. And in September of 2023, the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, changed the rules so that drones could fly at night. And that may be one of the reasons why now people are seeing more drones than they did before, especially from dawn to dusk.
So, Maya, is it likely that people are just now becoming more aware and then more concerned about drones?
Right. It's a question that a lot of residents I've spoken to here in New Jersey have asked. Just to put this into context, though, there are so many drones registered here in the U.S. We know that there are over 790,000 drones registered in this country and more than 883,000 drones that require a pilot's license. We heard from an NYPD official today that also said many residents are sending up their own drones to try and investigate. So it really does kind of seem like this mix of folks trying to figure out for themselves what's going on and officials trying to determine where these objects are coming from that they're not able to identify. Ryan?
All right, Maya, thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. Let's talk more about it now with Mayor Michael Melham. He is the mayor of Belleville, New Jersey. So he's in one of the cities where they have been dealing with this quite a bit. So, Mayor, thank you for being here. Federal officials say they can't confirm where these drones are from, but then at the same time, they say they do not pose a national security threat. Do you and your constituents believe that assurance enough?
We do not. And frankly, we're getting tired of being insulted. I just got off a briefing with the White House Intergovernmental Affairs. And again, we're being told that there is absolutely, we're seeing nothing here. We are not seeing any drones. We're seeing basically manned aircraft. I mean, they're starting to really insult myself, our constituents, and many, many mayors around the state of New Jersey who have literally had these things hovering 100 feet over their houses. I mean, we literally just got told once again that there's nothing to see here, and we're getting tired of it.
So you were part of a meeting last week with more than 200 mayors that was held by the New Jersey State Police Department. You say that you just got off a briefing with the White House. I guess the thing I keep coming back to on this story is it's one thing for you to tell us there's nothing to worry about. It's not a foreign threat. There's no sort of national security concern here. But then at the same time, you can't tell us specifically what it is that we're seeing. Is that the same frustration that you have, that if it's not a threat, why can't you tell us specifically what it is that we're seeing?
It is. And frankly, you're right. You can't have it both ways. You can't say we have no idea what you're saying, but there's no known threat. You just can't have it both ways. I mean, we were told by our state police that they know for a fact these things are hovering over our critical infrastructure. We had a mayor in North Jersey who has 80 square miles under her belt, and she's got 4 critical infrastructures, 4 sets of reservoirs there. She had 60 drones hovering over them this past Sunday. You can't keep telling us that we're imagining this stuff. We're not imagining it. Our own state police in our own briefings is telling us these things are not emitting a radio frequency. Our own governor has said, with the state police standing next to him, that our pilots witnessed the lights turn off and saw them disappear. I mean, we're having a lot of issues here, yet they keep telling us we're not going to shoot them down if we think they're a threat. We're not going to do a temporary ban. You can't have it every way. Our residents are getting concerned, and the lack of transparency is doing nothing but fuel conspiracy theories on social media.
Yeah, and maybe expand upon that thought about the conspiracy theories, because it does feel as though we've entered a new phase of this story where there is this sense that people are overreacting, that they're actually seeing regular commercial airliners landing and taking off, that they're police helicopters that they're witnessing. And I'm sure that's true. I'm sure more people are now taking the time to look up into the skies and are concerned as to what they're seeing. But do you feel as though that concern and these new levels of reporting that are probably just basic things are because of the void that was filled from before?
Absolutely. I mean, here in Belleville, we're in northern New Jersey. We border the largest city in New Jersey, Newark. We are dead smack in the middle of Newark International Airport and Teterboro Airport, and our residents in this area are starting to look up to the sky now. And every single night they look up to the sky, and there's no doubt. I mean, there's no doubt that there is some misidentification that's happening. We know that to be a fact. But I've had trained police officers, drone operators who are police officers, video things and say absolutely beyond a shadow of a doubt, these are drones, these are not manned aircraft, and somebody needs to finally get to the bottom of this. I mean, it's ridiculous that we have technology that, you know, they can read your driver's license from a mile up in the sky, probably why it's still in your pocket, yet they can't tell us what's flying just above our homes.
So Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill, who I'm sure you know, she represents Bellevue. She's a former Navy helicopter pilot. She released a plan to identify drones and then improve communication with the public so they know what those drones are. I mean, what do you think about the Congresswoman's plan? And at least is the idea what needs to be accomplished here, filling this gap between what exists and getting that information to people so that they aren't worried about it all the time?
I mean, that's perfect. We welcome all the congressional help. I saw Josh, you know, on the program just earlier. They're calling for federal assets to come in here. We were told by our state police that New Jersey has among the best drone detection equipment. We have MetLife Stadium that has drone detection equipment. It's going to do very little if these things are not emitting radio frequencies, which is the reason why we can't jam them and bring them to the ground, because it's kind of unique. That said, I do not think it's going to be a foreign adversary. I actually do believe that if you listen to the little bit of information that we've had, and more so what they're not telling us, especially about the fact about the blinking lights and everything else, I don't think this is a foreign adversary. I'm of the belief that these things are probably federal assets. I can't imagine that our U.S. senators and congresspeople aren't aware of it, but they very well may be U.S. assets that are being deployed to look for something. And that's what I'm concerned about. I'm no longer worried about who the drones belong to. I'm more concerned with what they're doing up there. Are they potentially sniffing for something? Because they keep flying in a grid-like pattern.
All right. Mayor Michael Melham, thank you for the reality check as to what your constituents are dealing with. We appreciate it as this story continues.
Thank you.
After the break, we're on the ground in Israel, where the clock is ticking for Biden officials to broker a ceasefire and hostage deal in Gaza before the next administration takes over. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Secretary of State Antony Blinken confirmed over the weekend that the Biden administration has made direct contact with HTS, a designated terror organization and the main rebel group that overthrew the Assad regime in Syria. It underscores the ongoing diplomatic challenges in Syria, with the U.S. urging a peaceful and Syrian-led political transition, and that contact with HTS is part of the renewed efforts to find American journalist Austin Tice, who disappeared in Syria back in 2012. Here's what his mother, Deborah Tice, told Kristen on Meet the Press yesterday.
The U.S. government has made the decision that they're not going into Damascus. So my feeling is if they don't want to be there, they shouldn't be there. And the people that are there are the people that are determined. They're going into some really deep and dark places. And obviously they are compelled to be there, and the U.S. government is not.
Should the U.S. government be there?
What do you think?
It comes as the ousted Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad posted what appears to be his first statement since fleeing to Russia. NBC News has not been able to independently verify Assad remains in control of the Telegram account where the statement was posted. But in it, Assad claims he did not plan on fleeing his country. NBC News international correspondent Matt Bradley is in Damascus and has more.
Well, we just learned from Bashar al-Assad over his Telegram platform, over the official Syrian presidential Telegram account, making his first statement. If confirmed, this would be the first time that the world has heard from Bashar al-Assad directly ever since he left Syria and sought asylum in Moscow. He said in this statement, which was kind of a defense of his actions last week when this regime fell, he said that my departure from Syria was neither planned nor did it occur during the final hours of the battles, as some have claimed. And he said at no point during these events did I consider stepping down or seeking refuge. Now, he said that on the morning of December 8th, the day that this regime fell, that he actually had been in Damascus, prepared to fight on until the last, and that he was advised to move on to Russian air bases in Latakia in the west of the country, which he did. And it was by the evening of that day, on December 8th, that he was advised to leave the country and to head to Moscow. Now, it's unclear whether this statement is going to move anybody here. Walking around this city, this country for the past couple of days, everyone is ecstatic that this dictator is left. And for most people here, this statement is going to come as little more than just the death rattle of a regime that has dominated this country for the past half century. And there are signs that this country is already moving on. Yesterday was the first day of school for students here in Syria. We were seeing embassies open, businesses are opening back up, people are in the streets. And despite the fact that everybody is going to have to rebuild, that this country is mired in an economic crisis after nearly 14 years of a terrible, horrific civil war, and the pain is still being felt by so many people, walking around and talking to people, they're all smiles. They can't wait to move on. And even though there are so many unanswered questions about the nature of this new regime, which is tinged by Islamism and has past associations to Al-Qaeda and Islamic State, most people here, at least for now, seem ready to trust them.
Matt Bradley, thank you for that reporting. With me now from Tel Aviv is NBC News international correspondent Raf Sanchez. So, Raf, Israel is carrying out military operations in the Golan Heights and as well as carrying out strikes in Syria. What more can you tell us about that? And is there a concern that they will expand fighting if Israel's already involved, the fighting they're already involved in, I should say?
So, Ryan, Israel has moved very swiftly, very aggressively since the fall of the Assad regime. As you said, they've carried out hundreds of airstrikes inside Syria. They say they are targeting not just the biological and chemical weapons stockpiles left over by the Assad regime, but basically destroying all of Syria's conventional military equipment also. So it's fighter jets, it's helicopters, sinking pretty much the entire Syrian Navy. And they say the goal here is to make sure that these weapons do not fall into the hands of extremists. They have also sent Israeli troops into what was a UN-designated buffer zone in between Israeli and Syrian positions on the Golan Heights. And then those troops have gone further into Syria itself, taking up strategic positions there. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu says that this is a temporary move. It is designed to stop the chaos in Syria spilling over into Israeli-controlled territory. But the deeply held concern among many Syrians and many Arab states is that Israeli forces are going to entrench themselves there and that this is basically a stealth annexation of Syrian territory. Your question, is this going to lead to Israel being mired in more fighting? The reality is Syria is so weakened right now, it has very little ability to threaten Israel, even if it wanted to. Ryan.
So, Raf, Brett McGurk, of course, a senior NSC advisor, he remains in the region to work on a ceasefire deal. What's the level of optimism there in Israel that we could see a deal this month, which is the timeline that Jake Sullivan laid out last week?
So the Israelis have a calendar, too. They can see there's not a whole lot of this month left, but there is optimism, Ryan, that we are going to get to a deal. Israel's defense minister was speaking in a closed-door parliamentary committee earlier, and he told lawmakers Israel is closer than ever to reaching a hostage ceasefire deal. That was confirmed to me by an Israeli lawmaker who was in the room. And what's notable about that, Ryan, is this is Israel's new defense minister. He is very loyal to Prime Minister Netanyahu. He would not be out there raising expectations if he didn't feel that his boss was indeed open to a ceasefire deal. Another tea leaf as we try to read what's going on in these negotiations is what you mentioned. Brett McGurk, President Biden's most senior Middle East advisor, has extended his trip here in the region, and that is seen as a sign that a potential deal is coming together. Ryan.
Okay, Rob, thank you for that. Still to come, what's next for a key ally after South Korea's parliament impeached the president for attempting to declare martial law? You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. South Korea's embattled president defied a summons from prosecutors today in their investigation into his short-lived declaration of martial law earlier this month. President Yoon, who is facing possible charges of rebellion and abuse of power, was also impeached on Saturday by the opposition-controlled parliament. His presidential powers were immediately suspended, and the country's prime minister is now serving as acting president. Yesterday, President Biden spoke with the acting president and expressed his appreciation for the resiliency of democracy and the rule of law in South Korea, according to the White House readout of their conversation. Joining me now is Victor Cha, who's the president of the Geopolitics and Foreign Policy Department and the Korea chair at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He's also an NBC News Foreign Affairs contributor. Mr. Cha, thank you for being here. Let's talk about President Yoon and this defiant speech that he gave after the vote to impeach him. What happens now? How long do you expect him to continue to fight this?
Well, I think as he said, he's going to fight it till the end, Ryan. I mean, where we are now is that there was an impeachment vote that successfully passed the national legislature over the weekend. It now moves to the Constitutional Court, where they need a minimum of 6 judges to agree that the motion is constitutional. In the meantime, the prime minister becomes the acting president. And then if all this goes according to plan, after the Constitutional Court rules, which could be up to 6 months to make a ruling, then there's a 2-month campaign period before we see the next president in South Korea.
What do we know about the prime minister who's serving right now as the acting president? Is he seen as someone who can handle the challenges in the region, particularly when you're dealing with North Korea and China as well?
Yes, I certainly think so. His name is Han Duck-soo. He is truly a technocrat. He has served both in progressive and conservative governments in South Korea. He was once ambassador here in Washington, D.C. as well. So I think he's a very competent individual. He's not political, but it's just a situation that he's now in this sort of caretaker role as we wait to see the outcome of the impeachment process, the Constitutional Court, and potential an election. But this could take us well into 2025, long after Donald Trump takes office in the White House.
And we've obviously seen a lot of protests in the country as a result of this. How much confidence do the people of South Korea have in the prosecutor's ability to carry out this investigation into President Yoon? And ultimately, do you expect that people will trust the outcome of the parliament's impeachment inquiry?
I think in generally that they will. I mean, this is not the first time we've seen impeachment happen in South Korea. 2 other presidents have been impeached. In one case in 2004, the legislature voted for impeachment, and then the Constitutional Court convened and they overruled the impeachment and the president went back to work. In another case, they impeached the president and the court agreed, and that person was ousted from office. So there is confidence in the process in South Korea, even though it's a very rambunctious and rowdy democracy. In the end, in most cases, we see democratic resiliency as these institutions are tested and they prove to work.
And as you rightly point out, that this process could take a while, so there could be an acting president in place when Donald Trump resumes the presidency here in Washington. How should this acting president deal with Trump as he prepares to return to the White House? I mean, what does that relationship look like?
Well, it's difficult, I think. For one, there's very little chance that the acting president would become the next president of South Korea. So that raises the question of whether Donald Trump would even want to meet with an interim president. A lot of the affairs of state, I imagine, between the two and the alliance would be handled by the foreign ministry, the foreign minister in South Korea, as well as the, if confirmed, Secretary of State Marco Rubio. But as we all know, it's important for leaders to connect with Trump, and that will put Korea at a significant disadvantage, as many other world leaders, as they already have done, have started to try to meet with Trump and establish a personal rapport.
And then, of course, there's the North Korea of all of this. How do you think Pyongyang is viewing this situation? Does Kim Jong-un see it as an opportunity to sow more chaos, or does his relationship with Trump play a role here, and does he ultimately show restraint as South Korea figures this process out?
So it's an interesting question, Ryan. I think there are 2 dynamics taking place. On the one hand, I think that the North Korean leadership is enjoying the political divisiveness in South Korea and is kind of sitting back and watching. If they do anything to South Korea, they could end up uniting the country rather than dividing it. So I think they're watching it all happen. At the same time, we know that every time a new president comes into office in Washington, D.C., North Korea likes to take some sort of action. They did a nuclear test after Obama took office. They did it after Trump took office. They didn't do it after Biden, but that was because they were in a COVID lockdown. So I expect the North Koreans may do something when Trump comes into office as well, again, next January.
And then, of course, we know that North Korea has been engaged with Russia in some of their military operations. The Pentagon confirmed today that North Korean troops are engaged in combat alongside Russian troops in the Kursk region. And the Pentagon has even taken it far enough to say that North Korean troops have suffered casualties. If their troops continue to be killed and wounded, how long will North Korea be willing to continue to send their own people to the front of the Ukraine war?
It's a good question. I think on the one hand, the North Korean leadership sees sending these troops as a way to establish a relationship, a security relationship with Russia, demonstrate the strength of their troops, give them combat experience. On the other hand, if the news keeps coming back that they're getting killed and captured and even defecting, this could create a disincentive for the North Korean leader to continue helping Putin in this way.
All right, Dr. Victor Cha, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I'll be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now, but we've got more news straight ahead as the news continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.